Shilian didn't know whether to laugh or cry and was about to command Ruoya to grab onto something else when the weight on his arm suddenly became lighter. Shilian's heart sank. This wasn't the feeling of Ruoya being released, but something much worse. Sure enough, the red silhouette suddenly grew closer and was soon within reach. Sanlang had been dragged into the windstorm too. Shilian shouted, "Don't panic," but the moment he opened his mouth, he got another mouthful of sand. At this point, Shilian had gotten used to eating sand. He was trying to tell Sanlang not to panic, but in all honesty, he didn't think the boy would panic in the slightest. Ruoya continued to withdraw back to Shilian, closing the distance between him and the boy who had just been blown into the sky. As he suspected, Sanlang didn't look the least bit anxious, appearing as if he could calmly open up a book and read right there and then. Shilian wondered if Sanlang had gotten dragged in on purpose. Ruoya wrapped itself around the waists of the two to rope them together. Shilian then commanded, "Go, try again, but don't bring up any more people." The silk band shot out once again, but this time it had grabbed onto Nanfeng and Fu Yao. Shilian felt drained. "Ruoya," he said tiredly, "I said no people, but I didn't mean it so literally, all right?" Shilian twisted himself toward the ground and shouted, "Nanfeng, Fu Yao, hang on tight." Down below, Nanfeng and Fu Yao did their utmost to try and anchor themselves, but the winds were simply too strong, and soon, without any surprise, another two silhouettes joined them in the twister. Now all four of them were tied together by Ruoya. They were swirling about in the twister, getting pulled higher and higher off the ground, winds and sand meshing and blowing about. "How did you both get blown up here too?" Shilian shouted, enduring all the sand going into his mouth. "Ask your dumb Ruoya," Fu Yao yelled back, also getting mouthfuls of sand as he spat out those words. Shilian seized his dumb Ruoya with both hands and said woefully, "My dear Ruoya, all four of us are counting on you now. Please don't grab the wrong thing again. Now go." Shilian miserably released Ruoya once more. "Stop relying on that toy. Think of something else," Nanfeng roared. But just then, Shilian felt a tug from the other end of the silk band and lit up. "Wait, give it one more chance. It's caught something." "It better not be a random passerby. Let the poor person go," Fu Yao roared. Shilian was also afraid of the same thing. He tugged back at Ruoya, but it remained taut and firm, and Shilian let out a breath of relief. "It's not. It's something solid, quite stable." Then he commanded Ruoya, "Pull." Against the crazed twister, Ruoya rapidly shortened and dragged the four of them out of and then away from the windstorm. Gradually, Shilian could make out the contours of something large, black, and half-round down below, the size of a small temple. When they finally touched the ground, Shilian saw that this round structure was actually a giant boulder. In the midst of the windstorm, this boulder was like a fortress, the perfect shelter. While on the road earlier, none of them had seen a rock like this. Who knew how far the twister had taken them? When they landed, they immediately circled around to the back of the boulder to hide from the wind. The moment they went around, understanding dawned on Shilian. He cheered, "Thank the heaven officials' blessings." It turned out that behind the boulder there was a hole. The hole was as wide as 2 doors combined, but the length of half a person. Although a bit short, it was still possible to enter if one bent down. The hole's opening was jagged and slant, but appeared to be more haphazardly man-made rather than naturally formed. When Shilian entered, he discovered that the inside was actually hollowed out and quite deep. It was dark further inside, so he didn't bother trying to look around and settled down where there was light. He patted the sand off of Ruoya and wrapped it back on his arm. Nanfeng and Fu Yao were both spitting out sand, covered in it from head to toe. From their eyes to their ears to their mouths and noses, and all over their clothes. They peeled off their outer robes and shook them out, dumping small mounds of sand onto the ground in the process. Out of the 4 of them, only San Lang looked unruffled. He lazily dusted himself off and was proper again. Other than his lopsided ponytail, his carefree form remained unaffected. That ponytail had been tied by Shirlian and was askew to begin with, so a little wind made no noticeable difference in any case. Nanfeng wiped his face and started cursing, while Shirlian dumped sand from his bamboo hat. I didn't think you two would get pulled in as well. Why didn't you use the 1,000-pound weight spell? We did. It was useless, Nanfeng spat angrily. From the side, Fu Yao was still shaking sand out of his outer robe and said nastily, "Where do you think we are? This is a desert in the northwest, not the main domain of my general." Nanfeng continued, "The north is the territory of the 2 generals' pay, and the west belongs to Chuan Yijun. You won't find a Nanyang temple within a 100-mile radius of this place. There is a saying that even a powerful dragon cannot win against the local overlord snakes. As Nanfeng and Fu Yao represented the generals of the southeast and the southwest, their powers were restricted outside of their own territories. That's really quite hard on you guys." Shirlin watched their annoyed faces and felt sympathy for them, thinking that this might have been their first time getting pulled into a twister and tumbled about. San Lang sat down next to him. With the hand propping up his cheek, he asked, "So are we just going to sit here until the storm blows over?" "Looks like that'll have to be the case." Shirlian turned to him and replied, "As strong as that twister is, it can't possibly blow a giant rock into the sky. You never know. Like you said, there's something off about that wind." A sudden thought came to Shirlian. "San Lang, may I ask a question?" "Go ahead," San Lang replied. "That Guoshe of Banyue, is it a man or a woman?" Shirlian asked. "Did I not mention it earlier?" "It's a woman," San Lang replied. Just as he suspected, Shirlian thought. He said, "Earlier, when we were resting at the abandoned inn, didn't we see 2 figures pass by? The one in white was a female cultivator." Fu Yao looked doubtful. It's not easy to identify whether it was a man or a woman by those robes, and that individual looked taller than your average woman. "Are you sure you saw right?" "I'm absolutely sure," Shirlian said. "So I thought that she might be the Guoshe of Banyue." "It's possible," Nanfeng said, "but there was another black-clad figure traveling next to her. Who could that be?" "It's hard to say, but that person was walking even faster than she was. Their strength is definitely not below hers," Shirlian said. "Could it have been the other evil Guoshe, Fang Xin?" Fu Yao wondered. "I think in regard to that, the whole dual Wicked Masters title is given only because historically what they've done is similar. Both were equally evil, so people connected them together as a pair to remember them more easily, like the 4 famous tales or the 4 great calamities. Even if there aren't 4, they are made 4 because it's simpler." Hearing this, San Lang burst out laughing. Shirlian stared at him. "It's nothing," San Lang said. "I just thought that what you said made sense. One of the 4 in the 4 great calamities is certainly only there for the head count. Please continue." Shirlian continued. "In reality, the dual Wicked Masters don't have any relation to each other. I've heard of Master Fang Xin. He was the Guoshe of Yong'an, born at least 100 years earlier than Master Banyue. You don't know of the 4 great calamities in the ghost realm, but you know about Master Fang Xin of Yong'an in the mortal realm?" Fu Yao asked, in disbelief. "I overhear these things while collecting junk in the mortal realm. It's not like I collect junk in the ghost realm, so of course I don't learn anything about them," Shirlian explained. The wind outside the hole seemed to be dying down. Nanfeng walked closer to the opening of their shelter patting the rocky surface here and there, inspecting it. Why would there be a hollow rock like this in the middle of a desert? He thought the boulder to be rather suspicious, but Shirley didn't think this to be so. They're not rare. Back then, the people of Banyue would build shelters like this to hide from sandstorms, or even for passing nights while out grazing their livestock. Some holes weren't dug, but rather they were blown out, Shirley said. How could they graze in a desert? Nanfeng asked, confused. Shirley smiled. It wasn't all desert here 200 years ago. There used to be an oasis. Gurgur, Sanlang called. What is it? Shirley turned his head to reply. Sanlang raised his hand and pointed. The rock you're sitting on seems to have writing on it. What? Shirley looked down, then stood up and found that where he had previously sat was actually a stone slate. After wiping off the layer of dust, there were indeed letters on its surface. The characters were carved lightly in a vertical manner, with the slate half buried in the sand. The words were faint and shrouded in darkness. If there were writings here, then they must be inspected. I don't have much power left. Can anyone lend me a palm light? Shirley said. Nanfeng snapped his fingers, and a small burst of flame ignited in his palm. Shirley stole a glance at Sanlang, but he didn't appear surprised. Shirley supposed that after seeing the distance shortening array, there wasn't much more to be surprised about. Nanfeng moved his palm to where Shirley directed him to brighten the writing on the stone slate. The characters were odd, as if drawn by a toddler, slanting and wild. What the hell is this? Nanfeng wondered. It's Banyue script, Sanlang replied. I'm sure he meant the meaning of those words, Shirley said. Let me see. Shirley cleaned off more dust and sand from the stone slate and revealed first column of writing with the largest characters. They must be the heading. The same characters also appeared repeatedly in various sections of the text's body. Fu Yao approached and also produced a palm torch. You know how to read Banyue script? He asked. Truth be told, I collected junk in Banyue before that whatever wicked master of Banyue came about, Shirley replied. Is there something wrong? Nothing, Fu Yao humphed. I'm just wondering where you haven't collected junk. Shirley flashed a smile, then looked down again at the characters. He suddenly said, General. What? Nanfeng and Fu Yao answered at the same time. Shirley looked up. The first word on the stone slate is General. He paused for a moment, but there's another character after that I'm unsure the meaning of. Nanfeng seemed to have sighed in relief. You just keep looking and think. Shirley nodded, and Nanfeng shifted his palm over to further light up the other words. Something didn't feel right, Shirley thought. There seemed to be something more at the peripheral of his vision. With both hands pressed on the rock, Shirley raised his head. Above the stone slate, the flickering flames illuminated a stiff human face. This face, with its bulged eyes, was looking straight down at him. There was a scream, but the one who screamed was not Shirley or Nanfeng, but that stiff face. Nanfeng immediately took out his other hand and ignited it as well. He put both hands together and grew the flames until they were bright enough to light up the entire cave. The one whose face was revealed by the light was a person that had been hiding in the shadows this entire time. When the flames grew bigger, he scurried alongside the wall toward the inner cave, and there Shirley saw 7 to 8 people huddling in fear, trembling. Who are you? Nanfeng shouted. Nanfeng's angry cry echoed in the cave, and Shirley, whose ears were still ringing from the scream earlier, covered his ears. Noise from the windstorms had deafened their hearing, and ever since they entered the cave, they had been discussing the wicked master of Banyue, and then the writing on the stone slate. So no one had noticed that there were also others hiding within the same shelter. The 7 to 8 people shivered for a while before an elder of 50 or so years, stammered. "We're a merchant caravan passing through the area. Just normal merchants. The sandstorm is too big, so we're hiding in here for the time being." He was the most composed in the group, and by the looks of it, he should be the leader. Nanfeng asked, "If you're normal merchants, then why are you sneaking around and hiding?" That elder was about to respond when a youth of about 17 years shouted, "We weren't planning on sneaking around, but you guys suddenly rushed in. Who knows whether you're good or evil? Then we keep hearing you talk about the wicked master of Banyue, some ghost realm, and igniting fire in your palms. We thought you guys were the Banyue soldiers out patrolling and hunting for flesh. No way we'd make a sound." "Stop talking, Tian Sheng." The old man hushed the boy, afraid that he might offend the other party. The youth had thick brows and large eyes, the face of a tiger, but he shut up immediately the moment the elder spoke. Shirlin put down his hands, his ears no longer ringing, and smiled brightly to relax the atmosphere. "It's all a misunderstanding. Let's all relax and not panic." He paused before continuing to explain. "We're not Banyue soldiers. This servant is only a cultivator from a small shrine. These are people from my shrine. We only know small tricks, nothing fancy. You are normal merchants, and we are normal cultivators without malicious intent. It just so happens that we all entered the same shelter to hide away from the sandstorm." Shulian's voice was soft and gentle. Each word was spoken slowly to calm everyone's nerves. After much explanation and reassurance, the merchant party finally relaxed. Suddenly, Sun Lang laughed. "I think they're being way too humble. Those merchants aren't as simple as they say that they are." No one understood what he meant and looked at him in confusion. Don't at least half of the travelers go missing when trekking through the Banyue Pass? To cross this land while knowing this rumor, surely you're all extraordinarily brave. There's nothing normal about you. "That's not true, young man," the elder responded. "Some caravans have passed through without harm before." "Oh?" Sun Lang hummed. "As long as you find the right guide and go around the Banyue territory, then all is well. So this time we sought out and found a local to lead us," the elder said. "Yeah," that youth, Tian Sheng, spoke up. "It all depends on the guide. We owe everything to our Zhao Ge. If not for him, we wouldn't have been able to avoid all those quicksand pits. When the sandstorm started, he knew exactly where to bring us to hide. Otherwise, we would have been buried alive in sand by now." Shirlian took a glance. This Zhao, who guided them, looked rather young, seemingly in his 20s, with a clean, respectable face. When he was praised by the other two, he didn't make a show of it, only turning away glumly. "It's nothing. I'm just doing my duty. Hopefully, when the wind dies down, none of the camels or shipments will have been damaged. They'll be fine for sure." The merchants were all very optimistic, but Shirlian had a feeling that things weren't as simple as they all thought. If all trouble could be avoided by simply not crossing into Banyue territory, then did all the former travelers who lost their lives die because they didn't believe in the rumors? Shirlian gave it some thought and said to Nanfeng and Fu Yao in a quiet voice, "This is too sudden. Once the storm passes, we'll need to make sure these people pass safely before going to the Banyue ruins." Then Shirlian looked back down to continue deciphering the Banyue writing on the stone slate. He recognized the word general earlier, but that was because it was a word that was often used. It had been 200 years since he last visited the kingdom of Banyue. Even if he was fluent then, it had all been forgotten since. To suddenly pick up the burden of translation really required time and patience. Just then, Sun Lang said, "Tomb of the General." Shirlin remembered now. The last character was the word for tomb, grave, burial, and other similar terms. He turned to look at him amazed. Sanlang, do you know Banyue script as well? Sanlang smiled. Not much. I only know a few words because they're interesting. Shirlian was already used to him saying that. The word tomb was not one often used. If Sanlang only knew not much, how would he happen to know exactly what this one character meant? Sanlang's not much had come to mean ask away, and Shirlian seized the opportunity. Excellent. Maybe the characters you recognize happen to be the ones that I don't know. Come closer and let's examine this together. Shirlian waved his hand lightly to beckon, so Sanlang went over. Nanfeng and Fu Yao stood next to them, lighting the tomb for them to read with their palm torches. Shirlian lightly touched the words with his fingers, reviewing the writing in low voices. The more they read, the more amazed they looked, before gradually becoming more glum. The merchant boy, Tian Sheng, was young after all, and youths were prone to curiosity. After the slight altercation earlier, it was as if they had become familiar, so he called out, "Gurgur, what does it say on the rock?" Shirlian snapped out of it and replied, "The stone slate is a memorial. It tells the story of the life of a general." "A Banyue general?" Tian Sheng asked. "No, a Midlands general," Sanlang answered. "A Midlands general?" Nanfeng was puzzled. Why would the people of Banyue build a memorial for a Midlander? I thought that the two kingdoms were constantly at war with each other. "This general is special," Sanlang replied. "Although the memorial calls him a general, he was actually no more than a captain. But he was promoted to general later?" "No. At the beginning, he led troops of hundreds before dwindling to a troop of 70, and then to 50. In other words, continued demotion. The feeling of being demoted to the point of nothing was quite familiar to Shirlian, and he could feel eyes on him. He pretended not to notice and continued to decipher the Banyue writing. Tian Sheng couldn't understand and continued to ask, "What kind of official gets demoted lower and lower in rank? As long as he didn't make any major mistakes, there should only be delays in promotion, not demotion. How much of a failure do you have to be?" Shirlian rolled his right hand into a fist and raised it to his lips. He faintly cleared his throat and replied in a stern voice, "Young man, receiving continuous demotion is not as rare as you may think." "Huh?" Tian Sheng was confused. Sanlang chuckled. "It's true. It happens a lot." He paused before continuing. "This captain got demoted time and time again, not because he was incapable or incompetent for duty. Despite poor relations on both sides of this conflict, instead of winning battles on the battlefield, he kept getting in the way." "What do you mean, getting in the way?" Nanfeng asked. "He prevented his enemies from killing Midland civilians, and he also blocked his own army from killing the people of Banyue. Every time he did this, he got demoted in rank." Sanlang spoke light-heartedly, and the 7 to 8 merchants sat closer to him like it was story time. Soon they got into it and started commentating. "I don't think that the captain did anything wrong," Tian Sheng remarked. "It shouldn't be a problem if you let soldiers kill each other, but not civilians, right? He's too blindly kind for a soldier, but overall he didn't commit any crimes. Yeah, he's saving lives, not killing people." Shirlian smiled at all the comments. The merchants before them had never lived a day at a battle-torn border, and were not the same people of 200 years ago. The kingdom of Banyue had long perished. It was easy for them to say this, to criticize that, and even compliment. But the actions of that captain weren't so easily forgiven back then, not with the simple remark of, "He's just blindly kind." Within the group, only Ah Zhao understood better, probably because he was a local. Now is now. 200 years ago is 200 years ago. To only receive demotion was already a blessing for this captain, Ah Zhao said. Fu Yao, however, clicked his tongue. Laughable. Shirlian could pretty much guess what he was about to say and rubbed his forehead. As he expected, Fu Yao looked rather troubled under the light of the flickering flames. One must do the duty as demanded by their position. If he became a soldier, then he must always remember to defend his country and kill enemies on the front lines. Casualties are inevitable in a war. Such soft-heartedness has no place in war and will only drag down his fellow soldiers. His enemies will also think him foolish. No one will thank him in the end. Fu Yao's words had irrefutable logic, and silence soon filled the cave. He continued dryly, "People like that only have one end, death. They will either die in battle or at the hands of their own people." After being struck speechless for a moment, Shirlian broke the silence. "Yeah, you're quite right. He did die." Tian Sheng was shocked. "Ah, so how did he die? Was he really killed by his own people?" Shirlian chewed on his words, but still replied in the end. "Not really. Here it says that there was once a battle when both sides clashed, and as they fought, this man's bootlaces came loose, and he stepped on them. He tripped, and then—" Everyone in the cave had thought that the death would have been tragic but heroic, so they were all taken aback at first, thinking, what kind of death was that? Then laughter exploded. "What's so funny?" Sun Lang arched his brows. Shirlian also piped up. He cleared his throat. "Yeah, it's rather tragic. Let's be more sympathetic and not laugh. We're in his tomb after all, so let's give him some face." "I don't mean anything malicious by laughing," Tian Sheng immediately claimed. "But his death is just so—" There was nothing Shirlian could do. Reading the epitaph to this point, even he wanted to laugh, so he didn't comment and continued to translate. In any case, even though this captain didn't have a good reputation in the army, the border citizens were all very grateful for his efforts and called him general. They built this simple stone tomb for him and erected a stone slate to remember him by. Later, the people of Banyue discovered another miraculous thing about this memorial. As long as one kowtows before the stone slate 3 times, one can transform all disasters met in the Gobi Desert to good fortune. Sun Lang completed the translation. His tone of voice was mysterious and meaningful, very convincing. His expression was also serious, so when the group heard, several of them immediately started prostrating, muttering that they'd rather believe it than not. Shirlian, however, was confused. "Is that written here? Is it really that magical?" Sun Lang smiled softly and said in a lowered voice, "No, I made that up. But since they laughed earlier, their prostrating now should make up for it." Shirlian looked back at the stone slate and saw that it was indeed the end of the epitaph, and there were no more words. At first he was feeling a bit woeful, but now he thought it funny and whispered back, "Why are you so mischievous?" Sun Lang stuck out his tongue, and the two chuckled. Just then someone shrieked, "What's this?" The shriek echoed in the cave, sharply reverberating against the walls, causing everyone's hair to stand on end. Shirlian instantly turned toward where the shriek came from and demanded, "What happened?" Where the merchants were once sitting, everyone had scrambled in a flash, scurrying away in fear and alarm. "Snake!" they yelled. Nanfeng and Fu Yao moved their palms towards the commotion and lit up the ground in that direction. Curled on the sandy floor was a slender, brilliantly colored snake. "Why is there a snake?" The crowd was growing increasingly anxious. Why did the snake not make any noise when it slithered out? When the flames lit up over the snake, it instantly became alert and raised itself to a position of attack. Nanfeng was about to torch it when someone leisurely strolled over and easily snatched the snake with his left hand, clutching it at its heart. He brought it closer to observe it and said, "Isn't it normal to have snakes in the desert?" Someone this unscrupulous and gutsy was of course San Lang. They say to fight a snake, seize it where the heart is. If pressed here hard enough, no matter how venomous its fangs, it'd be helpless. The snake wrapped its long tail around San Lang's arm meekly. At closer range, Shirley could see clearly. The snake had translucent skin, its vivid red insides mixed with the visible threads of black resembling inner organs, rather disgusting. The tail was the color of flesh, segmented like layers of a hard shell, unlike that of a snake, and more like that of a scorpion. Seeing this, Shirley's face changed, and he called out, "Watch out for its tail." Before Shirley had finished his sentence, the long snake body that was wrapped around San Lang's left arm suddenly let go. The tail snapped backward and tried to stab viciously toward San Lang. Venomous as the tail was, San Lang's right hand was faster and easily caught the tail. Now holding both the head and tail, San Lang showed off the snake to Shirley like it was an interesting toy, laughing. "This tail is pretty cool," he said. On the end of the tail grew a long red needle. Shirley sighed in relief. "I'm glad you weren't pricked. It looks like this is a scorpion snake." Nanfeng and Fu Yao had come near to observe the snake too. "Scorpion snake?" they asked. "That's right," Shirley said. "It's a rare poisonous vermin found only in Banyue. Scarce in numbers. I've never seen them before, but I've heard of them. Body of a snake, tail of a scorpion. Its venom is the strength of both combined, and if bitten or pricked." Shirley trailed off, watching San Lang twisting the snake, pulling and squeezing as if it was a towel, stopping short of tying it into a bow. Shirley was speechless for a moment. "San Lang, stop playing with the poor thing. It's dangerous." San Lang laughed. "Don't worry, Gogo. It's nothing. The scorpion snake is the symbol of the Banyue Guosha. I've got to take this rare chance to examine it." "The symbol of the Banyue Guosha?" Shirley asked in awe. "That's right," San Lang said. "Apparently, it was because the Guosha could control these scorpion snakes that the people of Banyue believed in her powers and worshipped her." Hearing the word control brought alarm to Shirley. When it came to controlling anything, whatever it may be, it usually came in mass numbers. "Everyone, leave this cave. There may be more than one scorpion snake." A voice cried out before Shirley could finish his words. "Snake!" Other voices started yelling. "So many snakes! They're over here too." From within the shadows, 7 or 8 scorpion snakes soundlessly slithered into the cave. They came so swiftly and quietly from unknown crevices, but they didn't attack, only watching and judging. Soundless in both movement and attack, not even hissing from their tongues. Nanfeng and Fu Yao released 2 fireballs and shot them toward the snakes, exploding flames inside the cave. "Get out!" Shirley yelled. No one needed to be told twice, and all of them ran outside. Luckily, it was still light out, and the twister had long passed. The wind had died down. The group of them escaped out into the open ground and kept running. As they ran, someone spoke up. "That stone memorial is too scary. How come, after we kowtowed 3 times, we still ran into stuff like that?" Shirley was thankful that they didn't know those last words were fabricated by San Lang. But then he heard someone else say, "Yeah, it's pretty much the same effect as worshipping that scrap immortal. The more you pray, the more unlucky you become. In a place where barely any sticks could hit him, he would still get shot by an arrow." Shirley was speechless. Suddenly, Tian Sheng yelped in alarm. "Uncle Zheng!" That elder that he had been assisting had collapsed. Shirley darted over. What happened? He asked. Pain filled the face of Old Man Zheng, and he raised a shaky hand. Shilin grabbed hold of his hand and frowned, his heart sinking. There was a growing angry swelling that was spreading rapidly down his palm, and within the red and purple bruising there were 2 small punctures, barely visible. A wound this tiny would not have otherwise been noticed until it was too late. Everyone, check and see if you have any wounds on your bodies, Shirlin called out immediately. If you do, use a rope to tie them off. Shirlin turned the hand over to examine it further, and saw that the red and purple swelling was climbing up the veins of the arm. He was just about to unravel Ruya when, next to him, Ao Zhao ripped a strip of fabric from his own clothing and promptly knotted it tightly on the old man's bicep to prevent the venom from progressing. Shirlin was amazed by his speed. He looked up, and Nanfeng wordlessly took out a medicine bottle and popped out a pill for the old man to swallow. Uncle, are you okay? Tian Sheng cried. Ao Zhao Ge, Uncle won't die, will he? Ao Zhao shook his head. To get bitten by the scorpion snake means certain death within 4 hours. Tian Sheng was shaken. Then, what do we do? Old Man Zheng was the leader of the caravan, and the other merchants also started panicking. This buddy here just gave him a pill, right? That wasn't an antidote, Nanfeng said. It's only for temporary longevity. The most it can give him is 24 hours. The crowd became even more distressed. Only 24 hours? Does that mean that we can only sit here and wait for death to come? Is there no saving him from this venom? Right then, San Lang walked over slowly. There is a way. Everyone turned to stare at him. Tian Sheng turned his head joyously. Ao Zhao Ge, if there's a way, then why didn't you say so? You gave me a fright. However, Ao Zhao was still silent, and he soundlessly shook his head. Of course, it's not easy for him to say, San Lang said. How could he possibly tell you that the bitten one could only be saved at the cost of everyone else's lives? San Lang, what do you mean? Shirlin asked. Gege, do you know the story behind the scorpion snake? San Lang asked. In the legends, many hundreds of years ago, there was once a king of Banyue who, while hunting, inadvertently caught 2 spirits born from 2 venomous creatures, 1 snake and 1 scorpion. The 2 venoms cultivated deep within the mountains, ignorant of the world, and causing no afflictions. The king, nevertheless, considered their nature and believed that they would cause evil sooner or later. He planned to execute them. They begged and begged for their lives to be spared, but the king was cruel. He forced the 2 creatures to mate at one of his many festivities before a drunken audience, and after the festivities, they were still executed. Only the queen was sympathetic and pitied the 2 creatures. In order not to go against the will of the king, she could only cover their corpses with a fern leaf. The snake and the scorpion became vengeful spirits and cursed the descendants born from their mating to forever remain in the kingdom of Banyue to destroy its people. Since that time, the scorpion snakes are found only within Banyue territory. Should anyone be bitten or pricked, the venom would spread like wildfire, and they would die a miserable death. However, thanks to that one act of kindness from the queen, the fern leaves used to cover its corpse became the antidote for their venom. The plant is called shanyue and only grows within the borders of Banyue. Is the legend true? Can it be believed? The merchants asked anxiously. Little buddy, this concerns life and death. Don't joke around with us. San Lang smiled but said nothing, refusing to speak more after telling Shirlin the tale. Tian Sheng turned toward Ao Zhao. Ao Zhao Ge, is what the red-clad Gege said true? After humming for a moment, Ao Zhao replied, Whether the legend is true or not, I do not know, but the Shanyue plant does indeed grow within the walls of Banyue, and it is indeed the antidote for the scorpion snake venom. Meaning that the only way to live after getting bitten is to venture into the kingdom of Banyue? Shirley asked. No wonder so many caravans would pass through Banyue territory, despite knowing the deadly rumors. It wasn't that they were defiant and stubbornly went to seek their own death, but rather that if they didn't go, they would certainly die. The scorpion snake was a symbol of the wicked master of Banyue, and they were also controlled by her. The appearance of these snakes was no mere coincidence. With only a few heavenly officials like them here, there was no way that they could ensure the absolute safety of the entire merchant group, and there was no knowing how many more snakes may show up. Shirley raised his 2 fingers and pressed them against his temple, trying to connect with the heavenly communication array to see if he could borrow more junior officials with his thick skin and have more help in protecting the people. The connection would not respond. Shirley lowered his hand and wondered. I didn't use up all of my powers, did I? I calculated this morning, and there was still a small bit left. He turned to Nan Feng and Fu Yao. Can either of you try and enter the communication array? I'm blocked. After a moment, the other 2 also looked grim. I can't get in either, Nan Feng said. Could it have been the sandstorm that disrupted their connection? There had been cases where the connection would become frazzled in areas of highly evil aura, potent enough to diminish the powers of various heavenly officials. It seemed as though that was what was happening right now. Shirley paced in a circle and wondered out loud. It might be because we're too close to the kingdom of Banyue, so the communication array was blocked. Just then, in the corner of his eye, there was a flash of red. Nan Feng and Fu Yao were busy trying to reconnect with the communication array, and everyone else was occupied checking for wounds on their body. The boy Tian Sheng was anxiously holding tightly onto the old man Zheng and didn't notice a wine-red scorpion snake soundlessly climbing up his spine, curling near the neck and opening its mouth. However, the fangs were not aiming at Tian Sheng's neck, but at San Lang's arm right next to it. The snake leaned back and then pounced. In the speed of a second, before the snake had the chance to sink its fangs into San Lang, Shirley's hand shot out and snatched the snake right at the heart with blinding precision. Given his strength, Shirley could crush the snake's heart if he wanted to, rupture its innards and spill its insides. But not knowing whether the snake's flesh was also poisonous, he didn't dare to press harder. Shirley raised his other hand to grab for the tail, but the snake was slippery and artful, making it difficult to catch. Shirley squeezed, but only felt something soft and cold slither between his fingers, and the next moment, a sharp needle pain flared from the back of his hand.